In my 20 plus years of working in the cloud computing space, I've discovered some hard truths about cloud computing that most people don't understand. Here are 5 of them. So welcome to the Cloud Computing Insider. This channel explores the ins and outs of cloud computing without an agenda or following into the narrative set by big tech marketing. We look at what works and what does not, and the actual value of this technology in a balanced and information-forward way. If that interests you, please subscribe, like, and comment. I'm your host, David Linthicum, author, speaker, cloud and AI architect, top 10 cloud and AI influencer, B-list geek, and over-the-hill mountain biker. Let's get started. So I get these questions a lot. Obviously, the mentored courses that I do, things like that, people are looking for, nuggets of wisdom. Linthicum, you've been in this space for a long period of time. I guess I could say even back since the late 90s. What are the hard truths that you discovered? In other words, what are things that people misunderstand about the cloud computing space, common misconceptions? Really the realities of things that are normally, not said or not spoken out in the meetings and organizations and conferences out there. So let's get into those. So the first hard truth, cloud optimization tools mostly suck and providers like it that way. So cloud cost control feels manageable thanks to a sea of optimization tools that are available out there. And we've had them for a number of years, even AI ops and cloud governance tools and some of the FinOps tools that are out there. But the truth is most of these tools only scratch the surface, and that's kind of by design. I haven't found a kind of a fire in the belly, set of innovative, folks from the major cloud providers that want to dig into this problem and make these cloud platforms truly optimized. Because obviously if you optimize them, you're not going to get, pay that much money, or your cloud bills are going to be smaller. And there's got to be, kind of a conflict of interest in doing that. So the same people who are building these optimization tools are going to directly benefit from your cloud deployment not being optimized. So vendors, want your bill to be high. Optimized tools highlight trivial savings, but ignore systemic inefficiencies. So they do get into what some of the micro optimization opportunities are, your, tuning capabilities, but they miss the larger issues. And so, in other words, most under optimization of cloud-based deployments is due to bad cloud architectures, bad cloud planning. They're not using the resources correctly because it wasn't designed to do so. So the essence of the under optimization would be the actual design of the system. And obviously, that's something that's a bit more difficult to solve than, some sort of a tunable on these systems. And so they have a tendency not to point to these architectural optimizations. So, dashboards hide costs and opaque pricing models and convoluted usage reports that people are seeing. And third-party tools can introduce more noise than clarity and rarely address root spending issues. And that's a bit of a pet peeve of mine. I did do a show a few months ago in terms of very FinOps, having some inefficiencies and really kind of missing the more systemic opportunities within the cloud computing space to, drive real value, to drive real optimization through cost savings. And I think a lot of it is we don't have the tools that are able to tell us what actually needs to happen. For some reason, it seems to be ignored. And I think that's something that we have to consider. So the real savings take on hands-on auditing, not trusting anyone else's dashboard. I think that's the big thing. Hire a good consultant, hire a good architect to look at your deployment and see where the under optimization is occurring and get those fixed. That's all you can do. So the next hard truth would be enterprise contracts don't protect you from cloud risks. Sealing a multi-million-dollar deal with a cloud provider, feels powerful. I've done dozens of those in my career until you actually need to leverage these systems. So when outages occur, features, change or price bumps up. In other words, they start increasing prices on you. SLAs and contracts rarely shield you from the consequences. So people have a tendency to talk about SLAs and some of these legal protections that you can put between you and the cloud providers. They have a tendency not to get you to where you need to be in terms of protection. And the cloud providers are very good at writing these SLAs. In other words, if you read them, hopefully have an attorney read them as well, there's lots of legalese in there where they kind of take responsibility for nothing. So vendors bake in loopholes into guarantees at best. You get, service credits, hardly compensation when your business is down. So in other words, if they, do screw up, they'll give you a credit to buy more of their cloud services. And if it's causing a multi-million-dollar issue, in other words, outages occurred and impacted your business significantly, that's not even going to scratch the surface of their ability to return value to you. So an escalation path ends in bureaucracy, no support, our priority fixes. And this is a frustration I think many enterprises are seeing these days. The cloud providers out there, the big three, have gotten huge, and they're a big bureaucracy unto themselves, and they know how to hide behind the bureaucracy. And the people who sell these services, understand how to deal with issues around, some of the issues with the services, outages, things like that. Things don't work as planned. Performance isn't there, network issues. All those sorts of things are kind of coming up. They're fairly annoying, but very expensive when you add them all up. So the key takeaway is, only true defense to this is going to be, technical resilience and not legal language. And so figure out how these resources are going to be applicable to you and how you're going to leverage this technology. So number 3, and I kind of love this one, most cloud transformations are just legacy rebooted. Cloud transformation, ultimately is the current mantra that all these enterprises and cloud consulting firms are, pitching right now, but most projects are little more than classic, legacy reboots in disguise. And everybody who's doing these things understands that's the case. They're just not admitting so. So cloud native often means migrating untouched monoliths, into VMs or containers, not rethinking the application for cloud paradigms. And so what they do is they just pick a poorly designed, system on premises and put it in the cloud, and now it's a poorly designed system on cloud, and you're not really gaining much. In fact, you're losing a lot because you're going to see some under optimization, overutilization of cloud resources, bigger bills, more quality issues, performance issues, things like that. So these false transformations keep technical debt alive and, kick the maintenance can down the road again. So the idea that we're just changing platforms doesn't really solve much. Again, it's just pushing off the problem of having to re-architect and redesign the system. And that's something we're going to end up needing to do anyway. So boards, see cloud spend and assume modernization, missing the realities of old problems in new wrappers. And I think that's a big trend that's going on right now and has gone on for the last 10 years is, the legacy modernization stuff or the cloud modernization stuff is nothing more but a replatforming project. And doesn't necessarily bring the value back to the business that we thought it would. So if you're just moving, not rebuilding, you're only making old problems, ultimately more expensive. So this is not going to get any better by itself. And so this is going to take some real effort for the architects and the technical leadership within these organizations to understand that they have to attack these issues. And certainly as enterprises are moving, headlong into the AI space, and that's another rant unto itself, you got to have these existing data sets and applications that are in a good enough quality, good enough optimization, so they're going to be able to work and play well with these systems. And you're not going to have an AI system without good data. And so there's lots of fixing that needs to be done. So next would be the real security nightmare is your own people. And everybody in security understands that this is the case. And so we think that it's, some hacker operating, in some other hostile country that's, coming in and taking our data. That's normally not the case. High profile attacks draw headlines, but internal slip ups, normally things you don't hear about, really are the ones that wreak havoc in cloud security. And so when I audit organizations for their cloud security capabilities and look around in terms of what incidents occurred over the last 5 years as an indication of how they should be defended, almost all of them have some sort of a problem that was originated by their own personnel. Now, either accidental, people delete stuff, move stuff, carry stuff outside the organization on their laptops and it's stolen from their car. Things like that are, some of the stuff that's on purpose. In other words, there's a lot of espionage going on by your employees, not necessarily those outside the organization. So privilege creep, lack of oversight, sloppy configurations are, the fastest path to the breach. In other words, we're not doing a good job in maintaining our identity access management are security hierarchies, and cloud shared responsibility actually means that it's mostly your job to make sure these things are protected. In many cases, enterprises will go into the cloud with the assumption that the cloud providers themselves are the ones that are going to be responsible for dealing with the majority of their security. That's not the case. And you're just as likely to get hacked in the cloud as you are with your on-premises systems. And you need to consider that. So many data leaks are due to accidental public exposures or over permission access, not external hackers. And that's a core reality I think people don't understand. I think you still have, if you go to some of these security conferences, they always show, somebody in the dark room with a hoodie on, who's typing and, breaching your systems. And that's not where it's coming from. So most of them are going to be homegrown. So the takeaway here is going to be focused on access training and ongoing vigilance over chasing, the latest, threat buzzword, but this is about training your internal people. This is about putting protections that are protecting you from your own personnel versus just unknown individuals from outside the organization. You're going to be better off for it. And next would be cloud certifications are usually paper thin. And I'll put up a link to the video that I posted here a few weeks back on the real worth of cloud certifications. And really kind of the market is flooded with cloud certified professionals, but credentials are mostly a checkbox, not a proof of competence. Now, organizations like the easiest path to vetting people. And if they're showing up with a certification, AWS architect, AWS engineer, something like that, they're going to give them more credibility, and chances are it's going to be easier for them to get a job. But most certs, rely on multiple choice, memorization, missing the nuance of real world deployments and operations. They don't give you the hands-on experience you need to be an architect, to be a developer, to be someone who actually solves problems. And that's why when people throw degrees at me and certifications at me, that's not really an indication of how they're going to operate when they're working, in the real world. So, hiring for badges fills headcount, but doesn't guarantee engineers can handle real outages, scaling complex migrations. And I find that people with a lot of certifications and a lot of degrees have a tendency to fall apart under stress. And so the ones who are heavily experienced, have a lot of hands-on, been doing it for a few years, figured it out, they went to a community college, earned their way through, got a part-time job to break into the cloud business and work part-time for a couple of years. You're understanding an aspect of it. They're typically going to be far more valuable to me than someone who shows up with lots of certifications. So they're expensive, under-delivering. Projects are led by qualified teams unable to deliver on cloud's promise. So the underqualified teams are there because they look qualified, but they're underqualified based on the fact that they have these certifications. So the takeaway here is prioritize hands-on experience and real-world outcomes. That should be more important to you than a bunch of certifications. Certifications come with a lot of baggage. They have a tendency to be very biased to the vendor who gave them a certification. Obviously, some of these are independents, but the majority of them, probably 90%, are coming from AWS, Microsoft, or Google. They're paying $300 to sit for an exam. They're memorizing what they need to know to pass the exam. They're getting the certifications, and they're not worth more than before they started that process. They may understand about that particular technology, but again, I need people in the organization that are able to look at the technology space holistically and pick the right technology that is appropriate for the problems we're looking to solve. And that's almost never going to be a single cloud vendor out there, or any single technology provider. It's going to be a mix of technologies that are going to be best of breed. They're going to bring the most optimized value back to the business. And I know I sound like a broken record when I say that, but many enterprises are missing the mark there. So consultants are kind of complicit as well in, promoting particular siloed technologies. And we're not opening up our minds to other technologies out there that may be far more valuable to the business. And I think we should start doing that. So to summarize, cloud realities are harsher than the pitch decks admit. Optimization is a sham unless you own it. Contracts rarely offer true protection. Transformations often change nothing fundamental. Insider risks ellipse external threats, and certifications can't replace actual know-how. shine a light on these uncomfortable edges and achieve true cloud maturity in understanding the pragmatic use of this technology, which we do on this channel. So tell me if you agree with me in the comments. I'd love to hear about your own experiences and maybe your own hard truths that you found in the cloud field. And love to understand where you're coming from. So don't forget to like and subscribe and check out my other videos on this channel. Also check out my InfoWorld Cloud Computing blog, my 100+ LinkedIn Learning courses, of course, my Generative AI Architecture course, fully mentored out on Go Cloud Careers, and my other YouTube show, AI Insights Innovation on the Cube Research YouTube channel. And finally, my latest book, An Insider's Guide to Cloud Computing. So until next week, stay very safe. Later.